Welcome to the Crit House, everybody. I'm Jeff Larson. We recently had the opportunity to have a conversation with Amber Bracken as one of the reviewers on our program, who took a look at the work of Susan Moffat, who's a documentary photographer, and we spoke with Glenn Ruga, the founder of the Social Documentary Network. When that conversation was done in reviewing Susan's work, we talked a little bit with Amber about this amazing image that was the winner of this year's, the 2022 World Press Photo of the Year Award. And I thought that conversation was worthwhile. So I wanted to share that with you here on the Crit House. And I wanted to once again thank Amber Bracken for just an amazing discussion. Really one of the great photographers out there. And this image is, in my mind, one of the most moving images I have seen in my life. Take a look at our conversation with Amber Bracken. Amber, can I ask you about the image that won this year the World Press Photo Award? Because it really is. I'm not an emotional person. I'm a little stilted that way as a human being, but that image just, I mean, I was so moved, and just to the point of tear. I mean, you captured something so amazing in that. What were you going through when you were, maybe just, can you talk a little bit about what you were doing in shooting that image? Were you moving around? What were you looking at? I mean, you must have seen that, the rainbow, and been a little tickled pink that was there, and just in terms of.
Well, I knew, so that's installation of crosses was visible from the highway. So it was literally the first thing I saw. Like, I saw those crosses before I saw the school when I first came to town. So I was driving in, and you just see like cross after cross after cross after cross, and it does what it's supposed to do, which the makers intended, which is to really emphasize that these are so many children, and even the scale of them in real life. Like, you can tell in the photographs that they're children's size clothes, but even the crosses themselves are somewhat the size of children. And it does the installation itself really powerfully gives back like a physical representation to these disappeared kids, right? So I was affected by it like the second that I came to town, before I even saw the school. But it's really up right alongside the highway. It's quite busy, and on top of that, the highway's not like flat. Like, there's like a really steep embankment on the other side of those, on the edge of the highway. So between, having other things I had to do for the first couple of days, and not really being sure about going up there, and I didn't want to walk a kilometer down a busy highway necessarily. So I was just trying to figure out the best way to do it. And so it took me a couple of days. I was telling the night watchman at the residential school that I wanted to do it, and he offered to show me the path that the locals used to cross the highway.
Mhm.
So it had been rainy and gloomy and dark, and obviously I was hoping for some light, but I set a time with him in the evening to like meet him, and he was going to walk me over there. And then as we were walking, the like rain clouds broke apart, and we got sunset, because I'd set it in the evening, so we got evening light, which I was already just like thrilled. And then just as we climbed up to the top of the highway, like I said, that steep path along the embankment, I was like photographing. I was like loving all the golden light, just trying to frame it right. And Matt, who's the security guard and a survivor himself, he's like, "Oh, hey, look, there's a rainbow." Like, and then I turned around, and yeah, of course there's a rainbow. So it was like one of those things where you set yourself up for the circumstance, but also it was a gift, because I could have just as easily gone up there and it would have been rainy and gloomy, and I would have made those pictures anyways. But the fact that the sun decided to come out and gave us that rainbow at the same time was like, just something else. Like, yeah. But in the
Would
moment, yeah,
would you have
it was.
seen the rainbow if he hadn't mentioned it?
Yeah, I think so. But he did point out, like, also that like the rainbow itself, so like the rainbow in the photograph, it's kind of like there's a photographic kind of the right leg of it is in the photo. But
Mhm.
if you follow it all the way around this way, up the highway, there's Kamloops Residential School, and then there's the the orchard where they had found the children, where they found the graves. That was where the left foot, like from where we were standing, that's where the rainbow started, was like in the grave, in the graveyard, which
Wow,
felt meaningful.
yeah, I got
It's
the
interesting when
goosebumps
this
hearing that.
photo when this photo first appeared in the public, it was because it won World Press Photo of the Year, and there was a lot of attention for the photo. But it only appeared in the Times as an editorial image just fairly recently, right? It was just about 2 or 3 weeks ago that they used it to illustrate an article about.
No, they used it at the time. They used
Oh,
it
they
on the
did?
story, and they also used it in their like year-end photos or whatever. So it
Mm.
made two little blips, but it wasn't like, a huge thing. But I also think that that's because as big as the news was here in Canada for the New York Times, I mean, it's a news item, but it's not like the news item.
Yeah.
You're not going to see it in the CNN ticker about Canada's history of residential schools, right? So that was one of the gifts of the World Press, was like kind of raising the profile internationally. Like it gives international audiences a reason to engage with this story, which I think is really important. But yeah, so it was like a bit of serendipity and a bit of good planning, like as we do with as photographers, try to put ourselves in good situation and then hope everything works out. But it just did that time. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
well done, really. I mean,
Yeah.
and not only in creation of that amazing image, but in also raising the visibility of the story. Because I think it's one of those things that for me sitting here in Massachusetts and not paying as much attention to that, I'm not sure I would have heard as much about it if not for that photograph.
Yeah, thank you. And but I think it's also like, so Susan, kind of what I was talking about in terms of like what's the story for, what's it about, I think helps to guide your attention, so like I don't know if it's a fair comparison, because it was pretty clear in this case that the story that I was trying to tell was about the loss of all these children. But it was like really drilling down and trying to find the best example of what that story was. And so I did it in many different ways. I was photographing memorials, I was photographing people responding to the memorials, I was photographing the sites. But ultimately that installation was the one that really brought it back to the core of the story the most, like that was the one that so like being clear on what the story is that you're trying to tell, I think will help to guide you, because you're a really good photographer. But like, it's like sometimes we get out in the world and we're like, ooh, photography's, I'm not saying this is what you're doing, but we get kind of like distracted. Like I get, at least myself, I get squirrel brain, like, ooh, cool. So like paying attention and like putting yourself in particular situations, I think will help to get yourself in those right spots if you know what it is that you're trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just add that I've been really working hard to make sure that people know that the person who created that infrastructure, her name is Snedekwe Manuel, and so she did it with her friends and family members who helped her to install that. And she told me some things about why they did it that way. And one of them was that they really wanted people driving by to be confronted in a visceral way, by the reality of what, hundreds of children looks like. They didn't get to hundreds of installation. I think they got 50 or 60 put, but it still is really impactful in terms of like scale. It's something speaking to the scale. And the other thing I wanted to share that she told me was that she made them on those crosses, and she knows that we'll see them as crosses and that they'll be interpreted, like they're symbolic of grave markers, or even the church, which is related to the residential schools and how the children went missing and were murdered or neglected or however they died. But for her, they also have the meaning of the stars, which in her nation's belief system, that's where the children would go, like where their spirits would go, the ancestors, they're in the stars. And so they're symbolic of the children's journey home, now that they've been discovered and been able to like have ceremony. And those clothes are also a gift for the children, to like send them off in a good way, that they get to go home and are cared for, that they get one nice set of clothes to go home with. So it expresses like there's layers to it, and also like would not have been possible to make that photograph without all of their work and relationship in that community. So yeah, I'm really trying to Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that context. That's really good. Could you, is there like a website or some information that's online that I can link to in the notes so that people can find out more about her and that the art, the installation?
Snodekwe hasn't really been written about, or like that part of it hasn't been written about. I keep bringing her up in all my interviews, but nobody's like taken the thread to write about it yet.
Huh.
So I don't know. I could give you like a Coles Notes version of it, but no, it hasn't been published really anywhere. That's just from my conversations with her.
Yeah.
That's all. Yeah.
All right. Well, that should be written about.
I agree.